Welcome to Bridging Chicago, a podcast that aims to connect our listeners to Chicago's business, community, cultural, and charity leaders.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast. My name is Nathan Shula and I'm your host for today's episode. Be sure to check out our website, www.bridgingchicago.com, to check out our season 6 episodes as well as our past episodes of the podcast, including the first 5 seasons. Today, we are so happy to be continuing our partnership with Chicago Cares, a nonprofit organization here in Chicago that is passionate about educating and serving Chicagoans on the resources available to them. Our guest today is Rosie Drumgoole, the Chief Program Officer of Chicago Cares. Rosie, thank you so much for joining us today. I have to say that we had the amazing opportunity to be at the Chicago Cares Leadership Breakfast just a few weeks ago, from the time of this recording, obviously. That breakfast is always an amazing time for leaders to come together, to connect, to not only learn about your organization, but learn about what is happening in Chicago as far as social services and resources that are available. It's just a really good time to get together with people who really care about the city and its people. And so we're always really excited to get to talk to people from Chicago. It's been a great partnership.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm glad you had a good time.
Yeah. It's funny because we have gotten to meet with a few different people from Chicago Cares. We work obviously with Ellen Ray, your amazing leader there, who just has an appropriate name. She is a ray of sunshine, and she really is someone who just embodies the mission, I think, so well, but also just seems to have a way to communicate what you do to where it's like, oh, what do I do? Where do I sign up? How do I jump on board? Is that what you get from her as well? Does she really kind of set the tone for that?
Oh, 100%. 100%. To your point, Ellen is a ray of sunshine, and she is super inspirational and something that I aspire to. Mm. I joke all the time. I'm like, I'm just eating Ellen Ray's crumbs. Like, whatever she tells me to do, I'm going to go do. Because she just is so passionate, and it just like comes out of her pores. So yeah I would 100% agree.
Well, I love that when you see her work, she leads from the front, but it seems like she seems to be the kind of person who really digs into the work and really connects with people, all kinds of people, the volunteers, the people in the communities, the leaders in the city. I mean, it doesn't matter who you are. It seems like Ellen will find a way to connect with you, to inspire you, and to make it to where you're like, well, somehow I'm now like in this organization. I'm now on the board. I'm now like in it for the long haul.
100%. I think it's also the fact that she really does believe in the mission. It's not fake. You know what I mean? I think that's one of the things that really like attracts people to her. It's one of the things that gets people in the door for the organization as well, is that we walk the walk. We don't just talk the talk. And so, it's you just feel that, and she's not phony. She's not faking it. She'll give it to you straight. And so people are attracted to real honesty like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And she definitely is that kind of person. So we can see how that has, trickled down to the rest of the organization and its people. I'd love for you to share about your Chicago story. Are you from Chicago? If not, how'd you come here? And then how you got connected with Chicago Cares?
Yeah. So I am actually, I'm from Oak Park.
Okay.
So I like to say I'm like adjacent. I grew up like city adjacent. Yeah. I grew up on Austin and Chicago Avenue, but like on the Oak Park side.
Okay.
So
yeah.
I've never actually lived in the city proper. Most of my life I've lived in the western suburbs, so either Oak Park, Forest Park, the greater Oak River Forest Park area is what I call it. And now I'm actually out in Lombard. I just bought a house in Lombard last year. But I have worked in Chicago for a very long time. So just in a lot of different ways. But at Chicago Cares, I've been at Chicago Cares for 13 years. Wow. So that's awesome. I'm actually currently the longest serving staff person at the organization, which is wild.
Yeah.
So before I started at Chicago Cares, I worked at the Area Agency on Aging for Suburban Cook County Age Options. And so when I was in AmeriCorps there, and then I worked there for a little while and really got to be passionate about aging services, working with the aging population, working with people who have disabilities, doing disability justice work, aging justice work. But, 2008, the market sort of tanked. And so I was 25 and laid off, and I was like, whew, well, at least I got that out of the way, I guess, early.
When you're young,
I was like, all right, I don't really have any responsibilities, so I guess this is fine. And then, did some other stuff, but then found this job posting for a coordinator of senior services at this organization. And I was just like, okay, well, it feels like I can continue to do work with seniors, but maybe not in as stressful a situation. Like I can organize volunteer projects. And so I was like, I'll apply, and I got the job, and I was like, I'll do this for a couple years, and then I'll figure out what my next move is. And
13 years later, you're sitting here sharing its story.
Yeah.
That's so amazing though, because those are the kind of stories that make you go like, okay, you're where you're supposed to be, right? It's like, you know that this is the right path for you, because especially I feel like these days, people don't stay somewhere where they don't feel passionate and they don't feel like they are fulfilled. And I think now more than ever, it's like, okay, on to the next thing. I'll try something else. It's like throwing darts at a board and seeing what sticks. It's like, to have people, I've been at this firm for 8 years, and I look back and I'm like, man, like the only people who have been here longer are the leadership. And I'm like, it's crazy to think that I've been here this long, because it doesn't feel like that, but it really makes you know, like, okay, I'm doing the right thing here. And I assume that's how you feel as well.
Yeah, it's, it has never, I think in this current climate, everything feels a little hard. Everything feels a little disconnected.
Yeah.
But like, it has always felt like my calling. It has always felt like I'm meant to be here. And even in moments where I feel disconnected, like going to serve and going to have a conversation with somebody who I wouldn't normally get an opportunity to have a conversation with, going to a part of the city that I wouldn't normally go to, having an experience, seeing something that I don't normally get to see in Lombard, Illinois, right?
Right.
Whenever I have those moments of disconnection, I go and I do service, and it's like, okay, all right, it fills my cup. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. I was meant to meet this person. I was meant to do this thing. I was meant to say this thing to this person and have this whatever happen after it. And so it's those moments of chemistry that totally just push the train along for me.
Yeah, and working in the social services industry, it has to be so hard to just be constantly seeing some of the things I'm sure you've seen, and to hear the stories that you hear. Just having people here in the studio who have worked with these things. The stories are all over the place, sometimes joyous, sometimes heartbreaking. How do you stay charged? How do you stay motivated to work in an industry that is not only so difficult, but also seems to be fighting for every single resource that you can get, and then passing those on to the people who need them?
It's going to sound a little repetitive, but it is truly those relationships. It's truly those conversations. And like, I drive Ellen crazy, because I go to these meetings and I meet these people, and I'm like, all right, I got this thing. And she just goes,
yeah,
okay, we'll figure it out. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
But it is, because like, I hear the amazing stories of these amazing organizations that are doing this work, the stuff that you don't hear about on the news. You're not going to hear about, a violence prevention program happening on the Southwest side, Night in the Light, right? Like, they don't talk about that on the news a whole lot. They talk about instances of violence, but they don't talk about the work that folks are doing to interrupt those instances of violence, right? You don't hear about the really cool urban farming that's happening in Englewood. Englewood is actually a booming urban farming jewel in the city of Chicago. You don't hear about that stuff. You don't hear about anaerobic digesters in Auburn Gresham and how we have the only anaerobic digester in the Midwest, right? Like, you don't hear those stories unless you're actually going out to serve, and you're going out to these organizations and you're talking to people and you're hearing the energy in their voice and the excitement in their voice, and it becomes infectious. And so it's like, even when it feels dark, there are glimmers of people still pushing and still doing the work. And it's like, you know what? If you can get up every day and you can make sure that we have an anaerobic digester in Auburn Gresham, geez, I can get up and go answer this email. Like, you know, I can go organize this community group. I can go, you know, write this proposal because I want to amplify that.
Yeah. We've talked to a lot of organizations that work on either side of it, where it's prevention or recovery, let's say, where you mentioned domestic violence. So it's like there's a lot of organizations that work to try and prevent domestic violence and a lot of organizations that work to try and treat and to heal victims of domestic violence. For Chicago Cares, is there like one or the other that they lean more towards, or how do you kind of decide, okay, this is how we want to approach this? Are we looking at more one way or the other? Or are we just kind of trying to look at the problem as a whole and see what can we do here to help?
So I think as Chicago Cares, what we really want to do is we want to expose people. We want to connect people. We want to get people in contact. And so I think it's a little bit of a yes and, right? Like we don't try to live in like an either or kind of world. Sure. We really just like build these really strong relationships with our community partners, and we ask them like, you know, what's going to move your neighborhood forward? What's going to move the goals that you all have collectively come up with together? What is going to push that forward? Yeah. And then how do we lend volunteer power to that work of change, right? Like how do we leverage our platform to move things forward? Yeah. And so, you know, it starts with having those conversations and then curating an experience that's going to set somebody on fire, right? So like, how do we get somebody in contact? How do we get somebody exposed to this thing that, like I said, they otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to get exposed to, right? So whether it's working with young kids on the west side, whether it's, you know, working with seniors on the south side, whether it's getting your hands into a community garden somewhere, like what is that thing that's going to spark that thing in a person, that light in a person, and make them want to like learn more. So like we get them in contact, and then we want them to ask the question of like, why does this exist? How do I learn more? How do I come back? How do I build this relationship with this person, with this garden, with this organization, with this neighborhood? And then once people kind of start asking those questions, they start building those relationships. That means they start to get invested. And once you're invested, you want to act. Yeah. And so that's when you start like, okay, then you've got somebody who's donating. You've got somebody who's voting differently. Yeah. You've got somebody who's advocating. You've got somebody who's organizing with their neighbors, right? Like, but it all starts with just getting somebody exposed, getting somebody in front of someone and fostering that connection.
Do you find difficulty in that in this city in particular because of its connection to its neighborhoods and how people love to say, I'm from this neighborhood or that neighborhood? And I've met people who literally, they've been like, I've never been in the north side. I don't know what's up there. Or there are a significant number of people who say, I've never been to the south side. I've heard about it. I don't want to go there. So for a city that's so connected to its neighborhoods and has a history of segregation because of that, does that create some tension or difficulty in that mission specifically?
So it's funny that you asked that question, because I feel like I make everybody laugh because I'm totally like the girl from the suburbs who like, I don't like going north on North Avenue. Yeah. That's me. I'm the problem. Yeah. But like, you know, I do think though, like as much as we want folks to go and visit new neighborhoods, right? We also want folks to feel like there's something in their neighborhood. Yeah. So like, you know, we focus on the Northwest, the West, and the South side of the city because a lot of people don't focus on those areas, and people in those communities need something in their community where they can like serve, right? Just like folks on the North side have plenty of opportunities where they can plug in, right? Like we want folks all over the city to feel like that they can invest in their neighborhoods. Okay. But we also like, again, it's that tension, right? It's like it's either or. It's not one thing or the other. Like I want you to feel like you have something in your neighborhood where you can like be invested in your neighborhood and you can like dig in and really get to know your neighbors. But I also like as a whole Chicago, we're one neighborhood. Yeah. So there's a little bit of a tension where I want you to be able to serve here, but I also want you to go check it out over there. Like you like gardens here? Great. I got a garden on the west side that you can go check out. Like, so then it becomes like a little bit of like maybe you get connected to an issue, right? Like maybe it's not necessarily the neighborhood but maybe you're connected to working with young people. So
Yeah.
like, let me tell you all the places where Play Streets is happening on the South and West Side. And so like, maybe you follow that. Or like, I have people who really enjoy doing food distribution. And so they do different food pantries. They do a different food pantry every weekend. So like, it's like neither one thing or the other. But, you know, I think framing it as like, we're one Chicago, we're all neighbors. It doesn't matter necessarily what neighborhood you come to. I just want you to know that there's beautiful things happening in the city of Chicago.
Yeah.
And Chicago is so much more than what we hear on the news.
Yeah, and I think also along with that, one of the things that I've tried to be cognizant of is that when I visit these neighborhoods, I'm not trying to take something from them. You know, yes, you're having the experience. You may be trying new places to eat or new places to shop, the local places. But it's not like you're coming in and you're just taking from that neighborhood. But when you learn about the neighborhood and when you are around the people that are there and when you see the vibrancy of it, it kind of fills you with this new love for the city and a new appreciation for a neighbor that you would have never met had you taken the time to go to that place and experience that thing.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, when you were saying, I don't want to take anything away, I actually like want people to take the stories away.
Yeah.
I want you to take the narrative shift away. I want you to take away that really cool thing you brought in that neighborhood. I want you to tell your friends that there's a place in Belmont Cragen where you can buy this really cool thing. You know what I mean? Like, that's the kind of stuff I want people to take away. Like, taking something away isn't necessarily a negative thing all the time. It's just a matter of, you know, the spirit that you're doing it with.
Yeah. And then sharing that with this way.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that you talked about when you were talking about Chicago Care's mission is obviously exposing people to new things. But one of the things that I really love about Chicago Cares is that it's so intentional as to why it does that. And along with that intentionality, I want to talk about this new program that you're running there called Power of Service, which is a training program for Chicagoans to think about service differently, as more transformational than transactional, and as a collective with their neighbors. And I think that there's so much power in that, hence probably the name I'm guessing as I'm realizing that now. But there's so much power in that because it's like you come to this place where it's like, wait, this isn't service for me and to meet my needs and to make me feel good about myself, but it's way more than that. And I'd like for you to share about this program specifically, what it is, and then what you hope people get from it.
Mm-hmm. And so I think the first thing with Power of Service is just acknowledging that this is something that we have learned with our community partners and with our stakeholder groups over years, right? So this isn't like a new concept or anything like that. It's really us sharing our learnings and the successes that we have experienced, right? And being transparent and sharing those learnings with the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
So it's not something that I think of as being like just ours. It is literally for everyone, right? It is something we want to share broadly. I think it is also a way for us to influence people to think differently about service, right? Like that it is powerful. I'm glad you had that epiphany.
I was like, light bulb there. Give that person a raise.
But to your point, I think a lot of times when people hear the word volunteer, they sort of like, I don't know, at least for me, I will use I statements. I think that when I hear the word volunteer, you think of like, a cute little lady, like doing something at the library, right?
Picking up trash in the park.
Right.
Yeah.
Or, I've heard people say like, volunteerism, they don't volunteer a lot because they feel like it's busy work.
Yeah.
Right. It's not really connected to anything. And so for us, we really want folks to think of volunteerism differently. We do want to flip the script on volunteerism. Yeah. And I think people feel like volunteerism is in a certain bucket because it feels transactional.
Yeah.
Like when I hear somebody say it's busy work, I hear, oh, you are not connected. It feels like busy work to you. It just feels like you're just trying to fill air. As opposed to you being connected to the mission, you being connected to the why, you being connected to the relationship, right? Service is not about the bookcase you build. It's about the conversations you had while you were building the bookcase. It's about you asking the question of why we have to build this bookcase in the first place. It's the fact that you're advocating for books to be put into this bookcase, right? So like what's happening to this bookcase beyond this instance of service? And so that's why I think power of service is so important, and it's so important for folks to come and interact with this program, because you're going to get a totally different perspective. Right? We're going to talk about what transaction and what transformational looks like. We're going to talk about why it's important to not act solely or individually, but why it's important to act as part of the collective, why it's important to be part of the community and to do community driven work, right? We're going to talk about the importance of shifting from like charity frameworks to justice and equity frameworks and what that means and what that looks like, right? Like it's a really robust program that's meant to get people in service, absolutely, but get folks to think differently about how they serve and just to, get their mind right when they go into different communities.
Is this a program that people can do individually or as maybe like a corporate program or like a team program?
Absolutely. So we do it for individuals, we do it for companies, we do it for nonprofit organizations. So even for folks who are designing volunteer programs, right? If we truly want people to have different volunteer experiences, right? Like then us as social impact sector, right? Like we need to think about like how are we designing service to be differently? How are we designing service so that people don't feel like it's busy work, but that they feel connected, right? Like how are we talking about charity to justice frameworks? How are we talking about our community and what it looks like to be community led, right? Like, so, no matter where you're coming from to this program, we have a customization for you.
And to that point, it seems like even as a social impact program, even as a nonprofit doing work here in Chicago, it's never like, okay, we've figured it all out. We've learned everything there is to learn, and now we can just do. It seems like you're always learning, and because of that, always passing that on to people who want to know, need to know, maybe against their will. But whoever will listen, essentially.
Because you are. Look, I am always learning. I'm always learning, and I don't. I think change is constant, and so being aware and being able to say like, okay, well, maybe I do need to do things a little differently is important. No matter if you're in the social impact sector, no matter if you're in the corporate sector, and like you're, like there could be folks from companies who have really strong corporate social responsibility programs and have really strong ties to the community, but maybe they need a refresh on their program, right? Maybe they need to attract their employees in a different way. And so this is also an opportunity for them to maybe we dust off our volunteer policy and our volunteer book a little bit based on what we learned from the power of service. So I think there's always room for learning, and I love this program because I think I've done it a bunch of times, and every time I facilitate it or I sit in a session with someone, I have an epiphany and I have okay. Are
these sessions ones that people can schedule themselves, or do you run them every so often?
So we run them on a monthly basis. Okay. So you can go to chicagocares.org. We have a tab that says Power of Service, and we run them on a regular basis. So there's an opening for organizations, institutions. There's also one for individuals. And then we also have information sessions. So if you wanted to learn a little bit more before you actually go through the whole training, you could actually do an information session and learn more about it and see if it's something that works for you. But we love to do things cohort based at Chicago Cares because we are community in all the different ways, right? We want to build community however we can. So it's always nice because you will always be doing this with a group, right? You will always have somebody to do some group learning with, someone to build a relationship with, somebody to bounce ideas off of.
So even if you just show up on your own as an individual, there will be people there who you can do all this work alongside.
You are going to make a friend.
Like it or not.
Like it or not. You're going to be in community.
Well, I love that because I do like to think that, all of us are in the social impact world, because whether you work at a corporation or wherever, we all have some level of responsibility. How we see that or how we interact with that may be different. But, I think we all do recognize that we have some level, and in some way we need to interact with that. And organizations that allow you to do that, teach you how to do that in a way that will work for you, I think is really important. And in our interactions with Chicago Cares, that's always been the case, where it's not, here's what we're going to do, going into a partnership saying, here's what we'll provide to you. It's going in saying, hey, like, what do you have here? What's missing? How can we help? Asking these questions of them that I think really create really good partnerships, but also further reaching impact.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think we can't do this alone.
Yeah.
I literally, and again, like when I take Ellen these harebrained ideas, and I'm like, oh, she's always like, who are you working with? So the fact that we are always also internally checking each other, right? Like we are always checking ourselves to make sure that we're being community driven, to make sure that we are actually including our community partners in our decision making. And so it's, rightfully so, when I bring her a harebrained idea, she's like, great, who did you get this from? Where are you tying this into? How does this ladder up to collective impact? Yeah. And that is always a gut check. I think, internally, just a little bit of like sort of our sausage making. We always ask the question of who are we benefiting and who are we harming? And that's super important, especially when you're doing volunteer work, right? When you're doing in service, because, you can have the best intentions in the world. But if you are not being thoughtful, if you're not being intentional, if you're not doing the hard work of making sure that you are collaborating with someone, then you have a higher instance of harm. You have a higher ability to do harm. And so, those relationships are key. They're literally the heart and soul of what we do. Yeah.
And in passing that on, I think is the other piece of that, is that the organization is so good at saying, hey, intentions are great, but execution is important. And I think your point is really well taken of, you can do good, you can do harm, you can do good and harm. And what do you want to be about, and who do you want to help, and how do you care about how you do that? Because I think there's a saying, something like the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yes, sir.
And I think about that and I'm like, it absolutely makes sense, because if you're not careful about how you execute that, then maybe you feel better, but what does that really get you at the end of the day?
Right, exactly. You feel better, but the world's not any better.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I think we all do want to leave the world a better place. Yeah. I really do.
Yeah, I personally don't know anybody who doesn't want to leave the world a little bit better than they found it. And I think there are a lot of really good, genuine people who genuinely want to do good. And so we just, we want to make sure that you actually do that. Yeah. We want to make sure that we help people find their cause, but that we do it in a way that mitigates as much harm as possible.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, I'm really excited about this new program, Power of Service. I think it's going to be amazing for people, and hopefully we'll get to take it and go through it either as a team or even if I just go myself. I'm excited about it.
Come on, jump in. You'll make friends.
I'm there. I already know one person, so that helps out. But I want to thank you so much once again for joining us. Chicago Cares is an amazing program, and so we're always happy to have someone from the organization here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us. Happy to come back anytime.
Absolutely. And of course, we want to thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast. Be sure to visit Rosie and her team at www.chicagocares.org, or you can find more ways to connect with them and listen to other episodes of our podcast on our website, www.bridgingchicago.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Bridging Chicago, as produced by the SATC Solutions Center. Nothing contained in this podcast shall constitute financial, investment, legal, and/or professional advice. No professional relationship of any kind is created between you and the podcast host or guest. You are urged to speak with your financial, investment, or legal advisors before making any investment or legal decisions. Furthermore, the opinions expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the opinions of SATC Solutions Center, SATC Law, or any of its employees. This podcast is created by the hosts and guests' individual capacities. All opinions on this podcast are or have been rendered based on specific facts, under certain conditions, and are subject to certain assumptions, and may not and should not be used or relied upon for any other purpose, including, but not limited to, or use in or in connection with any investment purposes or legal proceeding.